Canucks Price for Monday, March 10th, 2025, coming to you from the Nation Network studio, built by Arbor Lee, here at the historic Wall Center. In this program, a presentation of Bet365. Matt Sekeres alongside Blake Price, four-time Juno Award winner Mike Rogerson, hitting switches, conducting things. We have a big program planned for you. First of all, should mention Twitter's all screwed up today, huh? X is all screwed up. So for those of you who are accustomed to watching on X, out of our control.
Whatever happens, happens.
Whatever happens on X today.
Yeah. Tell your friends.
I'm not sure who's behind. All the more reason to watch on YouTube.
Dark Storm is behind it, apparently.
Absolutely.
Dark
Storm.
That's the name of the hacker group.
Well, I drove through one on the way to Harrison Hot Springs this week. I had never been, or at least I hadn't been since a kid. We had great fun there. And Blake and I were out socially on Friday at the Canucks game with our buddy Daniel from Surrey Mitsubishi and his buddy Paul. So thank you for that. Busy weekend for the Vancouver Canucks and beyond. We will get to it here on the program. We will start with the Surrey Mitsubishi poll question. Who is most responsible for the Canucks' lack of goals? You can vote Rick Tocchet. You can vote the players. Do so at the Sekeres and Price X, and the poll is working over there, and YouTube channels. Mr. Price, lead us off.
I still think the answer is the players, but I don't know that necessarily that's not absolving Rick Tocchet of anything. I think in a lot of instances, the well-oiled machine kind of a team, a coach, I'll throw arbitrary numbers out there. Let's say a coach affects play 10 to 15% with a well-oiled team. But with this kind of coaching, I think his coaching is affecting the team more than that. Double that, whatever. It's a larger piece of the puzzle. Is it the overwhelming? Is it the majority piece of the puzzle? No, I think the execution of the players is probably still first and foremost, particularly of the one player, Elias Paterson, who has seen the biggest drop-off in production. So I still think that's the biggest piece, but I don't think that just because that's still the biggest piece, we belittle the role of the other piece, which is growing and it's larger than it should be. I think there is another way to coach this team. There is another way to motivate these players. And the best thing I can point to is his repeated calls for the feet to move and for there to be more effort. He wants his team to work harder. And it's a nightly refrain for him.
I don't think work harder and effort. I think more work smarter, move feet.
Well, moving feet is working. If you're coasting, you're coasting.
Like oftentimes he said, a step or two to the left or right. So, I don't necessarily equate that with coasting. I think almost zone awareness might be a better way to put it.
I think he's attacking.
And of course, shooting the puck.
But he doesn't want them to shoot the puck all the time. That's, again, on him.
No. Not with Elias Paterson. How many times he said shoot the puck? Come on. I voted players. I don't dispute that Rick Tocchet's system stifles some offense, but coaches coach, players play. And our question asks most responsibility. And so for me, that is the players. And really, Blake, when you break this down, amongst forwards who have some goal-scoring acumen here, right? Like, I'm not going to put Teddy Bluger into this conversation. I'm not going to deal with the small sample size that is a Danton Heinen or a Max Sasson or a Di Giuseppe Ratu and those sorts of players. I'm going to deal here with the forwards who have. And neither Hedel or O'Connor either, because I think that's incomplete, although Hedel's in a rut. DeBrusk, Sherwood, Garland, Suter. All looking pretty good tracking pretty well. In some cases, career highs.
For the season, you're talking?
Yes, for the season.
Yeah.
All four of those guys are doing really well. Miller and Boeser. Miller, when he was here, down. Boeser, down. Both have missed time. Boeser to a concussion. Miller, of course, to his leave or suspension. Joshua and Höglander way down. Joshua's case, compelling reason. Höglander's case, not so much. So I got four guys on the ledger who are doing well. I got four guys on the ledger, one of whom is not here, not doing well. It really boils down to Petey, man. 12 goals in 57 games when you were hoping for something in the order of 35.
Well, I think Boeser, I think Besser's supposed to be a bigger piece, though, that like just equating one guy going up versus one guy going down. Besser's a big part of this,
Right, of course.
so it's his down is a big down.
Mm-hmm. So is Petey's.
Yeah, so you got two of your top four engines offensively, especially on the forward lines, with precipitous drops.
Right, and then the question is, do you assign more blame to Tocchet or to those individuals? And for me, it's those two individuals.
Right, but I would also argue, could the coach be mitigating those precipitous drops better? And I think the answer is also yes to that. So factually, I have to vote for the players.
Lines
still.
changing, line mates, chemistry. Okay, sure.
And off the
of the
ice,
year,
Zen Master shit too. I mean, like you've got to find a way to reach these players, and he's not finding a way to reach these players.
Mm-hmm. They were sixth in the NHL in goal scoring last year at 3.40 per game. They are 27th going into Monday's play at 2.71. And did you do some math with regards to calendar year 2024 or since last January or last February when the
Christmas break of last season? So as of Boxing Day 2023 is where the drop happens. From that point to now, 22nd in the National Hockey League in offense. Yeah, pretty large sample size. It's a full season and a half.
Yep.
You know,
of course,
with a spread of different player combinations there. Like Miller's there for the most part. Mm-hmm. And it's still not happening.
Yep. And of course, over the last month, by design and out of Tocchet's control, management makes a decision to recast the team, make it more stout defensively in the exchange that netted Marcus Paterson, Philip Hedl, Drew O'Connor, and moved JT Miller out. So, talked about it so many times this year. Rick Tocchet pushed every correct button last year. It was a virtuoso performance on the bench, one that netted him a Jack Adams trophy. This year, he, like many of these players, has had a very rough go at it. That is indisputable. And our friends at Surrey Mitsubishi want to cheer EP40 back to the top. Everybody at the dealership and beyond rallying behind him. Every time he scores a point, you save $500 the next day on any new or used vehicle. Hoping some people were in there Saturday after that great goal. If he gets 2 points, $1,000, 5 points, $2,500. You got to mention Sekerson Price. That offer is valid until the next game day. Time to cheer EP40 back to the top. Score more, save more, more value, more savings. Bring Surrey Mitsubishi any offer. They will beat it. Visit 13820 104th Avenue. Top story brought to you by Yellow Dog Brewing, Neighborhood Brewing, Foolish Winery. Split weekend where they survived Minnesota thanks in large part to goaltender Kevin Lankinen, but not Dallas because of a failure to score goals. And you and I were both really surprised looking at the chances in this game. Natural Stat Trick had Vancouver with a 14-5 edge in high dangers and a 24-7 advantage in chances overall. Alas, it's a 3-goal loss. Some of that was score effects with Dallas scoring early in the third and being able to take that 2-goal lead. But the troubles for Rick Tocchet go beyond just this team's offensive outage this season and more recently. Huge complaints now amongst Canucks faithful on deployment, usage of top players in a close game or trailing by a goal or two. Not to mention things like Connor Garland back with Teddy Bluger, which, this stage of the game, Connor Garland, I think, has to play with more offensively inclined players. But here it is. Elias Paterson, 16 minutes and 5 seconds last night. He was the 5th most used forward at even strength. Brock Boeser, 15 minutes and 49 seconds. He was the 3rd most used at even strength. Jake DeBrusk with 12 minutes and 45 seconds. And he had 10 minutes and 1 second, the least used player at even strength, period, last night for the Vancouver Canucks. Only 3 guys, of course, they're the only 3 guys besides P.F. Suter, who were below 50% Corsi on a night where a natural stat trick had the Canucks winning the chance battle. In fact, they were in the 30s.
Canucks had several guys in the 70s and high 60s, like even guys like Philip Petel who aren't scoring a ton of goals right now. They're 69% Corsi last night. Both games were so different. I felt like the Canucks played pretty well on Friday night, and the stats didn't really back them up. They were heavily outshot.
They gave up a ton Friday night, but there were moments of, yes.
But I felt like, especially for the first 2 periods, I thought they were trading punches pretty good, but the stats didn't back that up. Then last night, the stats say that they dominated, and then they looked terrible.
One thing I've noticed, when I go to a game, I always perceive the Canucks have more chances than when I watch it on television. And I think it's a bit of the crowd.
The crowd oohing and awing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
So, on deployment, and with these top, or would-be top offensive players, Daniel Wagner of Vancouver is Awesome took his crack at Coach Tocchet last night, wondering, what's up, Coach?
In a game where you were trailing for a good portion of it, DeBrusk, leading goal scorer, plays under 13 minutes. Paterson, 16 minutes. Boeser, under 16 minutes. Do you think that was that a reflection of how they were playing?
You got to earn your ice time.
Got to earn it?
Yeah, you got to earn your ice time around here. That's how you win. So you guys can stir it up all you want. You have to earn your ice time. I don't care how long you've been here. You got to earn your ice time. That's the way it works. That's how you win Stanley Cups. So
we'll stir it up as much as you let us, Coach.
Well, one of a couple of bouts of frustration that we saw out of Coach Tocchet last night, out of character, and you got to think that this is weighing on him. I understand what he is saying in terms of the big picture and earning ice time. I also understand the question. I think it's a valid one.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I don't think Rick Tocchet right now draws much of a distinction between Elias Paterson, Brock Boeser, and Jake DeBrusk with other members of the forward group. Garland, O'Connor, Edel, Sherwood, fill in some names there. DeBrusk, 1 goal in 6. It was on the power play against Anaheim. Boeser hasn't scored since the Four Nations break, so goalless in 8. Elias with the great goal on Friday. We'll talk more about that. I probably shouldn't mention Hedel because he's scored in his Canucks debut and has 1 goal in the 11 games since.
And normally I would say you've got to throw those guys with pedigree out more. You have to. The chances of Teddy Bluger rising to the occasion is still way below the chances of the other guys rising to the occasion.
That's sensible. That's sound logic.
And yet, of course, in the case of particularly Paterson and to some degree a guy like Boeser as well, the droughts are long enough now that you're beginning to question that theory just a little bit. Certainly with Paterson. I mean, Boeser does still have 18 goals. He's still on at least a 25-goal pace. Generally, those guys you keep throwing over the boards.
Yeah, I think you can argue that Elias has been more dangerous over the last week than Brock, but yes, I hear what you're saying.
Friday night was a revelation for Paterson. He looked Like, you know, we talked about the midweek game of being a walk on the road to running. Well, I thought it was a jog on Friday.
Yes.
And then to see him neither jogging nor walking on Sunday, he was standing, disappointing. Now,
Yes.
it's not a linear curve back to where he was. I realized that with Elias Paterson. But that was a farther step backward than I would have wanted to see on this path to rehabilitation for Elias Paterson. So that's disappointing. But I think I'm still ultimately going to default to you should probably just play the guys that have done it.
Again, sensible logic. Also, fair to say, not a huge distinction between the way some of these guys are going and the other available options.
Like Sherwood, remember Sherwood at the start of the season? Remember he was just
Terrific.
scoring the lights out? Hey, if a guy's going on a real heater, if a role player's on a heater, by all means. But, you know, try to juice it as much as you can. But nobody's on a heater. Nobody, like the Suitors and Sherwoods and
we'll get into who has scored here recently in a moment. Coach Tocchet quibbled with the premise of a question that the game got away from them last night, citing how few shots Dallas had, 19. He also lost his cool with the officials on the bench, and that is not something we have seen from Rick a lot.
And not
In
just
fact,
saying it's a BS call. He got personal with it.
He did. Yeah, well, I'm always a little skeptical of lip readers. So we don't know that he said what people are ascribing to him, which is that's why you don't work the fucking playoffs. But what we do know is that Tocchet took umbrage and got into a heated conversation with the officials. And that is not something that he has done a lot of in his tenure with Vancouver, and we have praised him.
Totally.
And I think rightfully so.
And that's all that I'm saying.
For
I'm
not losing his cool, projecting that calm and poise, not taking your players off the hook because you're so upset. Wally Buono used to say that to us all the time. If you sit there and you blast an official demonstrably, all you're doing is telling your players, hey, guys, there's a reason why we're losing or the reason why they're going to score or there's a reason. You take them off the hook. Not to mention, we've also praised Rick for this. Call goes against you. Okay, it's going to happen. Praise the official in the postgame. He's a good official. Take it big picture, set up the next call. That hopefully goes your way.
My feelings are not hurt by what he said, but it is against the pattern of what he's done in the past.
Yes, it is.
Just to be clear.
Well, I mean, your feelings have nothing to do with it. The
No.
referee's feelings are
So
the
the
ones I'm worried about.
No, but I'm saying I'm not on any soapbox saying he shouldn't be talking like that. Like, he can do what he wants. There's just natural consequences to your actions.
Oh, yeah. We know NHL officials have memories like elephants.
Yeah.
We know they exact retribution.
So the question is, why was his last nerve exposed?
Well, I think he's frustrated with the whole thing, Blake.
I think he's sort of echoing what I was just talking about the step backward for his team. Like, they had back-to-back wins. They looked a little bit better.
Yep.
And the gravitas of the schedule, he probably thought was taking hold on his team. That they had realized the time of the year, and they weren't seizing it.
Playoff race, no reinforcements coming, not scoring goals.
Yep.
Not being able to get on any kind of substantial run this year. Yet again, I mean, texting with the buddies going to the game last night, and we're saying this is a big game. Like, if they can beat a very good Dallas team for a third successive win, not only, of course, would they have jumped ahead of Calgary playoff bar-wise, where they're 1 point in arrears, but also, you can start to then feel like, okay, we haven't gone on a run all season. Here we go. It's going to happen in the final quarter of the regular season, especially with all these home games upcoming for the next 5 at home against some opponents that should be beatable on your home ice, not to mention the big Wednesday showdown in Calgary against the Flames. Now, herein lies the problem. And I completely understand, acknowledge 8 seeds beat 1 seeds in the NHL, 7 seeds beat 2 seeds. We see this. We see surprises there. I mean, who had Columbus beating Tampa a few years ago in the first round when they offered that historic season? Who had Florida beating Boston a couple years back when they authored that extraordinary season? But as J-Pat notes, the Canucks are now 0-5 versus Dallas, Vegas, and Winnipeg this year. And those are their most likely first-round opponents if they make it in. Winnipeg right now leads the Central, would play the 8th seed, which is what Vancouver is fighting for. Possibility that Dallas bypasses Winnipeg, so you get the Stars. And I guess there's even a possibility if the Canucks can reach Minnesota, who's slagging here a little bit, or Colorado, and get to that first wild card position, then you would likely play in the Pacific Division. Then you would likely play the Vegas Golden Knights. They have been held to 1 goal in 4 of those 5 games against the Stars, Knights, and Jets. 5 of their final 19 games are against the Stars, Knights, and Jets. And that's with them being still on the outside of the playoffs looking in, 1 point behind Calgary, going into tomorrow's game against Montreal and then Wednesday against the Flambés.
And like every game is so important for the Canucks now. If they win last night, they're at 71 points. They are 4 back of the Kings. So you're talking about the playoff matchups.
LA wins a shootout last. How often does LA win shootouts? But 23-4 as LA beats Vegas in a game with 11 goals.
We mentioned it last week. The Canucks wasted the Oilers and Kings stubbing their toes in the last 2 weeks.
Yep.
They've not been good, but now both of those teams have won back-to-back games.
Correct.
And it looks like the toe stubbing is coming to an end for those teams. So,
and of course, both teams made some deadline additions. Not in great shakes from the Kings with Kuzmenko, but Edmonton recast a bit of their team, adding Jake Wallman and Trent Frederick.
But, you know, the woulda, coulda, shoulda. This team is 3-5 out of the break. Remember, they had the 6-1-1 stretch going into the break. And no one is suggesting even that they should have gone that in the 8 games coming out. But if they're 5-3 versus 3-5, look at the math. Mm-hmm. They are still competing for second and third in the division. Mm-hmm. Every game at
for the Canucks, that's going to be the fun part. We're going to get to your deadline frustration here in a bit. We have certainly chronicled that the Canucks play low event hockey that isn't exactly thrilling on a night-to-night basis, and I can understand why the owner might be a little concerned about that in conjunction with a deadline where you probably should have gotten weaker and repositioned for next year. But the saving grace that we have now, and Blake, you and I are old enough to remember the dead puck era, and actually Vancouver was a little bit buffered against the dead puck era because of the West Coast Express. Yeah. I mean, they were the most watchable, or one of the most watchable teams through parts of the dead puck era. But, you know, in the other 29, 28 markets around the NHL during dead puck era, you watched. First goal was so important, right, Blake? If you got that first goal, you had such a high percentage chance of winning. And, you know, there will be it'll kind of be like watching soccer. Goals change games.
Goals matter immensely.
2 goals probably means that's that.
But the Canucks aren't even a good team when they score first. Like, they're a weird paradox there. Like, a decent defensive team that when they score first, it seemingly have no advantage to them. Very bizarre.
Did you see the Derek Forbort goal, though? Whoa! For a guy who had not scored in 82. Next feed, too, from Connor Garland. Victor.
Well, him sliding down,
Mancini gets his first point.
Him sliding down to score that goal.
Sliding down? Where's this coming from, Derek?
Well, in sports is funny this way, right? Like, if you're capable of doing that there, why aren't you capable of doing that more than what? Like, I don't know if he will ever score a goal like that, and he hasn't scored one like that up until this point. Why did that happen once and once only for Derek Forbort? Who knows?
Well, it was his first goal in more than 2 years. February 16th, 23 was the last time he scored an NHL goal. Of course, he has matriculated teams since then to Vancouver. And it was the latest, and this is why the wins here of late, I've quibbled a little bit with people using the word repeatable. because look who has scored some of the goals recently. Now, Paterson breaks a 15-game goalless drought. That should be repeatable. Keith Sherwood scored his first in 15 Friday against Minnesota. Okay, he's somewhere in the middle. Bluger gets his first in 28. Well, Teddy Bluger is not someone you're going to count on for frequent goals. I know he got an empty netters too. And then Sherwood, first in 82. And Carson Soucy even bumped a huge slump before he got shipped off to the New York Rangers. So great stories there, but not sustainable. Nor is winning a game like you did on Friday, where Kevin Lankinen has to make 37 saves and stand on his head and look like Dominic Hasek at different moments to beat the Minnesota Wild 3-1. What we can say about that is that at least Elias scored with the big one-time slap shot. And he had a terrific game.
He should have had one more.
Easily.
Opening moments of the second period.
He tried 2 dekes in the net front area.
Yeah.
And you and I both noted it and went, when is the last time he has summoned the creativity, the confidence, the whatever, to just attempt 2 of those old school Elias do your dekes bro moves that he did in the net front against the Wild?
Hammered a shot to start the second period that just missed the net as well. No, there was
3 shots
purpose
in the game, 6 shot attempts. It was the most shot attempts in a game for Elias since December 16th. And this goes back to our Surrey Mitsubishi poll question with Tocchet and the players who's most responsible. Players do have to shoot the puck to score. And there's been a paucity of shots on goal this year from guys who should be shooting the puck, like Elias Paterson. So, I know some people like to say, Sekeres, you're defending Tocchet too much, but first of all, I don't dispute that there are issues with the system, especially when you look at big picture and can you be a champion being mostly a counterattack, chip and chase team? I don't dispute that in the least, but I do think the majority of responsibility lies on this player group. Like Elias Paterson disappearing from status as an NHL All-Star and a frontline player, to me that's more attributable to Elias Paterson than to Rick Tocchet. What are our friends at Yellow Dog up to?
Well,
this
they've
week?
Got 2 different sales to tell you about, but on the same beer. It just depends on exactly how you like that beer distributed to you. Do you like the tall packs, tall cans, 4-packs, or you like a case of 355s?
I like the talls.
Well, those are on special for the month in the Chase My Tail Pale Ale. Look for it on sale at private and government liquor stores.
Okay, we don't have an answer on this question yet. I suspect it will be asked of Tocchet here once they host their media availability, and there is no practice per se today, but there is, I guess, film and video sessions, team meetings, what have you, back-to-back coming up Tuesday, Wednesday. I can understand why he's not practicing. But Brock Boeser is no longer wearing an A for alternate captain, and of course the captain is out right now, so you've got 3 A's out there. It has been reassigned to Marcus Paterson. And we know what the management team and certainly Jim Rutherford felt about Marcus Paterson. We heard those lauding comments when he was acquired from Pittsburgh. And even Tocchet followed up, said, hey, he's out there in the timeout of his first game talking, as we set things up. Normally the new guys, they stay pretty quiet in those scenarios. Paterson is out there leading. He loved that. None of this is to malign Marcus Paterson, who I think will be a fine choice, or is a fine choice, to wear a letter for this club. But it's the latest hit for Brock Boeser, who is having a poor season, who has heard the management group talk about how they're still evaluating him in terms of a contract extension, who received a low-ball contract extension offer, who we were told by management didn't generate particularly good offers on the trade market. And this despite the fact that the Canucks have now circled back and are trying to re-sign him after not trading him Friday at the deadline. So why has Boeser been stripped of this A? Is it because of the public comments? He had talked about being frustrated and the uncertainty. And,
Oh, my goodness. Was
you know,
that scandalous? That wasn't
he's
scandalous.
He's a feeler. They don't like feelers, Blake. They don't like feelers. They like shut up and fucking play
It
hockey.
barely registered.
Yep.
It barely registered.
Okay. Is it because he has no future here? They're signaling that? It's certainly a sign that Brock won't be back, right? And frankly,
You'd
I
think.
think, I know there was a thought that Brock would take a hometown discount to sign in Vancouver because he loves it here, and I'm not saying he's not. That remains a possibility. But boy, if he gets to July 1 and you've got offers that are over and above the Canucks, I do wonder, as much as he loves the city, whether the relationship with management and the coaching staff has eroded enough to the point where he decides, you know what, I'm just going to go play for somebody else now. Let me try my lot with a new coaching staff, a new management group, than with this one.
Well, the
I
story
mean, he loves the fans in the city here, but I'm not sure how he feels about management and the coaching staff these days.
The storylines are swirling around this player because, and he has to be of several minds of it all as well. I'm being disrespected. Okay, I'm going to take my talents elsewhere. And yet, I mean, do we leave a small percentage of a possibility that Patrick Allvin was telling the truth and that there weren't any good offers for Brock Boeser? And if that's the case,
I think that's in the eye of the beholder, but go ahead.
if that's the case, though, like, hey, he's going to get offers, but is the Brink truck going to get backed up for Brock Boeser? And how much do the last 6 weeks of the season help to dictate that? Like, is there a world where people are just saying, I can see what that player does, and I'm not willing to pay $8.5 million a season for that player?
Yeah. So to the notion that there weren't good offers for Brock Boeser leading up to Friday, if you believe that, you have to believe that he is a complete outlier from the rest of the National Hockey
That they
League
slalom
marketplace.
skied around the Canuck players to get to players like Kuzmenko and Beauvillier.
Yeah, and even if you believe that, there could be blame to assign to the Canucks front office for not appropriately marketing the player or putting him on the market too late, whatever the case may be. And we'll get into it more here. First, our buddy the Stanch and Wyatt aren't in recapping Friday. In terms of a presser, that went really poorly for Allvin. We talked about how it was probably his worst day as Canucks general manager, at least in terms of messaging. The summary being prices were too high to buy, but also his players had no value around the league. And by the way, only on-ice performance dictates value, and hey, the offers for Boeser were dog shit. Yeah, there was a number of comments that didn't necessarily align with Allvin on Friday.
Yeah, death players are too expensive. Also, our players aren't demanded. There's no demand. How are both those things the same?
He said that, quote, ownership has been very supportive to our hockey decisions we want to make, and I don't dispute that. What I think he failed to add is that they were supportive of an ownership decision last week, and that was to make the playoffs, to not weaken the team by trading roster players for futures, exclusively futures. Allvin said, quote, the reason we didn't do any moves, there was not a lot of market return for our players. It didn't make sense. I mean, that I suppose that could be if they were out of touch with the market, wanting roster players and in return for rentals. Dhaliwal said Boeser's agent was going through trade destinations, possibilities, because he had some trade protection in the few hours before the deadline. And then the Canucks came to him and wanted to do an extension. I mean, that smells like panic to me.
Maybe.
Greg Wyshynski of ESPN notes that Eric Tulsky, the GM in Carolina, said the Hurricanes were looking at additional moves before the deadline, but the Rantanen trade took so long that Carolina missed out on players they were targeting. PJ reported that Carolina was willing to do Kotkaniemi in a first for Boeser and wanted a prospect back, and Vancouver was unwilling. Elliott reported Vancouver wanted a first and didn't get it. Again, I wonder if something was missing there. It was a first plus
Yeah.
And then Alvin goes on 650 and is asked, and a very good question from Sat Shaw, because this is a management group that has routinely treated the trade deadline like a signing deadline. We either want to get players signed by that deadline. We saw it. Recent extensions, Lankinen, O'Connor.
Paterson.
Paterson, yeah. And, or they were going to move. They said at the beginning of the year they would need a decision on Boeser, and then they blew right through it. So I ask you, what changed there? Well, you were close to the playoffs as opposed to firmly in the playoffs. The owner absolutely wants to make the playoffs. So he gets asked that question on 650, and he says, yeah, I guess with the outcome of today, didn't really have any other options. That's part of the business and the risk you have to take to be in it. So one of the things that I've wondered, poking around on the weekend, did other teams recognize just how fragile this Canucks front office was with everything that has happened this year, dealing JT at low value, paying up for Marcus Paterson, and played hardball, played chicken?
They weren't going to give them the get-out-of-jail-free card. Exactly.
Did they know that this was a two-track deadline for the Vancouver Canucks, in that they had to make the playoffs? That was mission one. That was the mandate from ownership. And so they weren't able to, even though they knew better, make the pure futures deal that they needed roster players for rentals in an environment where people were willing to pay up in prospects and picks, but not necessarily roster players in return for rentals.
The biggest issue I have with that is that it's a blanket theory. Like, would a GM or two across the league certainly come into any negotiations with the Canucks with that attitude? For sure. But it's a big leak.
Yeah.
There's a lot of teams that are making the playoffs or are just outside of the playoffs, and you're telling me they uniformly all came to the table with that exact same assumption, and nobody approached it just as a genuinely interested acquiring team?
Mm-hmm.
I refuse to believe that.
What I wonder is if Alvin sat in that room Friday with Rutherford, knowing full well that this team here ain't it in terms of a cup contender, may not even make the playoffs, knowing full well that the smart thing to do was move their rentals and strengthen next year, position the club for the future. But we're paralyzed by the mandate of ownership wanting to make the playoffs, and so just decided on indecision. And if that is the case, then as bad as the Friday deadline was, the bigger problem for the Vancouver Canucks is you're back to a franchise that does not have organizational alignment. And how often did we talk about that, Blake? At least during the Benning era, they had organizational alignment. Benning made courage of his conviction trades, many of them bad, but with the full support of Francesco going, we got to make the playoffs this year. We got to make the playoffs this year.
We're reloading. We're not rebuilding.
Yeah, exactly.
We're reloading. We're not rebuilding.
And again, the Canucks were able to cut a corner in not rebuilding and produce the season they did last year. But it's very difficult to cut all the corners you would need to cut to get to the Stanley Cup and win it. One thing to be a playoff team, it's another thing to be a champion. The end of last season, Alvin was talking about all the steps that they needed to take, the mantra, the mindset, the work ethic, the preparation to be a champion. And this year at the deadline, they chose playoffs over championship. It wasn't the most aspirational deadline, as many are saying. That is very fair criticism, and we have seen all of your comments. And yes, there is no more honeymoon for this group.
We're missing something here. Like, what happened doesn't make a ton of sense, and what they're asking us to believe. Well, I'm definitely stopping short of calling them bold-faced lying here. But
they don't ever tell you the full truth.
But the tale they're asking us to believe.
Sports franchises, people in officialdom, they lie all the time. But we saw that earlier this year.
Yeah,
with the Miller Paterson thing.
But the tale that they are asking us to believe about these guys are too expensive for us to buy. These guys are too cheap for us to sell.
Doesn't pass the smell test.
You're asking us to really believe that, again, a metaphor I can come up with is a slalom skier going around every gate ever so delicately around all of the Vancouver Canucks interests. Like, it's asking a lot of us.
Yeah. Anyways, we shall see. We shall see how much this hurts the Canucks. We shall see if they can get Boeser, Suter, Forbert re-signed on good deals. If that's the aim from this point, we'll see if they can make the Stanley Cup playoffs, and we'll see if they get there, if they can advance. The good news is if they fail to advance, they have their first and second round picks. Right?
They're
going to get a chance to actually make those selections in the 2025, or at least we think. Who knows? They could be moved by now.
There's no chance they're picking those picks.
Yeah.
No chance.
So a mid, and the depth of this draft falls off somewhere past, I would argue, the middle of the first round, maybe somewhere around 17, 18.
Canucks have to use that pick in combination with a roster player, and it's going to have to be a good one, folks. Canucks need a center. How many times do I have to say this?
Yep.
They might need top two centers.
Yep.
And if they do, they're going to need a first-round pick to sweeten.
And it sort of reminds me, Blake, you remember we knew they needed a top pair right-shot defenseman.
Mm-hmm.
And a deadline went by without securing that. And a summer went by without securing that, even though several were traded and several were signed. And then they just bit the bullet, and they made the Horvat and Roenick trades. Like, they weren't going to let another marketplace come and go without filling that most obvious need. And we've got one signpost that has come and gone here, this trade deadline, without filling that major organizational need. Boy, they let the summer go by without that. I think we're going to have some frustrated and angry Canucks fans, and rightfully so, come next September. How about this news? Jujhar Khaira of Surrey. Can't believe he's 30 years old now.
I know.
Of course, we've seen Arshdeep Bains come up and play for the Vancouver Canucks as a local player of Indian descent. Jujhar Khaira has been acquired by the Abbotsford Canucks for future considerations. He's played 345 NHL games with the Oilers, Blackhawks, and Wild. Last was a full-time NHLer in 22-23. He's there to help the Abbotsford Canucks in their playoff
Doesn't
push.
have an NHL deal, folks. Cannot be called up.
Right. But it's probably just going to be in Abbotsford.
Yeah.
Also, I did not know the AHL trade deadline was later than the NHL trade deadline, but there you have it.
Yeah, there you have it. Yeah.
All right. Let's get to today's menu. It is brought to you by Greta. Greta, a fantastic spot to catch all the games, home and away, your steps from the arena and the stadium. They have the amazing arcade that encircles the bar, weekly drink specials. Try the street food menu. The smash burger is delicious. 50 West Cordova. We're going to have some Canucks Army viewing party coming up in April that we'll be telling you about. I know many of you love to come to those events, give away prizes. 50 West Cordova, Greta Bar. Let the games begin. Darren Dreger is going to edify us the best he can with the information that he was able to ascertain about the Canucks and their deadline activity. But even he says that, he was a little confused by what was going on around the National Hockey League in what seemed to be a pretty defined marketplace. It was a seller's market. You had a limited number of sellers. You had a huge number of buyers. And you had a Vancouver Canucks team that had a ton of cap space too. We should bring that up as well. Didn't want a broker. We're willing to retain. Didn't want a broker. And are now going to end this season with a massive amount of cap space. Blake, they accrued all that cap space, and somebody mentioned to me, how do you think you feel as one of these guys who really is an NHL player now, but has been shuttled up and down to Abbotsford, even on paper, as often as possible because, of course, those days in the AHL, they're making their AHL salary, not their NHL salary. So you're asking those guys
some
to
of
take
them are.
some of them.
Yeah.
You're asking those guys to take a financial hit on the days that they're being papered down to Abbotsford for the greater good of the team, cap space, add as much as we can, beef up for the playoffs, and then nothing happens with that cap space. So, that's of all the things that Patrick Allvin has to deal with post-deadline, I'm going to imagine that there was an agent or two who sort of went, wait, I thought you guys were loading up. My guys are going back up and down to Abbotsford to get you guys incremental cap gains here and there, and then you don't use the space.
And if they don't re-sign Brock Boeser, they've got space to go get the centers that we've talked about. But that means that they're going to either overpay for somebody on the unrestricted free agent market, and there's not anybody there that really fits the bill perfectly for the Canucks in terms of their demographic, or you're going to have to peel some assets for an overpaid center somewhere else that somebody else is trying to jump on.
Every free agent is beyond their preferred demographic.
Yeah, it really is.
Because you don't get to free agent 27.
Yeah.
27, 28. So, they jumped on DeBrusk last year as one of the youngest free agents, but there aren't a lot of those guys. Marner, Donato, Chikrin on the defense side, but I don't think you're going there, right? Boeser's one of the youngest UFAs out there this year. And then J-Pat's going to join us as well. We'll talk mostly about the two games and point forward on the final quarter of the season that remains here with the Canucks in a playoff race. So all of that is coming up on the program. Time now for our Bet365 bets of the day. And there was a moment of glee on Friday at Rogers Arena between Blake and I. Told you I liked Paterson as a goal scorer. Blake even went further than that, said as the first goal scorer of the game. So cha-ching, we help pay for some of those $14, $15 beers.
That's right.
Thank you, Elias, on Friday night. Toronto Maple Leafs' first ever visit to Utah. And tell me I'm wrong. There won't be as many Leaf fans in this building as they're accustomed to for road games.
Probably not.
Yeah. Utah in a playoff chase, more desperate. Give me the Yeti or Mammoth or whatever we're going to call the Utah Hockey Club. Even money plus 100.
I'm looking at some tennis because Canada's, maybe second greatest hope in any given tournament, Des Shapovalov, is up against Carlos Alcaraz down in Palm Springs. Plus 400 for Shapo. And you might think, it's Alcaraz, except there's been no bigger giant killer this season than Shapo.
Mm-hmm.
So plus 400, worth a shot.
When is that match on?
It says 7. I think it's in Pacific time, so I think it's local. Yeah.
Okay. Might even be able to watch that tonight.
Yeah.
Doesn't
exactly.
TSN have coverage of that?
Yep.
Okay. Looking forward to it. Oh, it's around a 32.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Is it around a 16 or 32?
I think I see 32. Chapo is seated again.
In this tournament, I think. Yes.
Yeah, 27th.
Yeah.
Okay, good for him. That's today's Bet365. And we're on a hot streak, everybody, so you're going to want to listen to us today.
Yeah.
Breaking news coming in from Bet365, where every nail-biting overtime win is a barn burner, every face-off, hat trick, power play, shot on goal, penalty shot, and every suspenseful minute in between. Amazing. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365, an official partner of the NHL. Download the Bet365 app today. Use code NATION to get in on the game. Must be 19 plus. Please play responsibly. Mike, we got Dreger next. Did I get that right? Darren Dreger coming up next. Harrison Price from the Historic Wall Center in this segment, a presentation of Resurrection Spirits, who have partnered up and created the Harrison Price Gin. How about this? Made in East Vancouver using BC ingredients, triple distilled, 100% organic rye grain, and infused with 5 timeless botanicals. A gin with character designed for those who appreciate the art of true craftsmanship in every pour. Get to resurrectionspirits.ca and order your bottle of S&P gin. You can use code S&P, the and sign, for $5 off. Get them while you can. Limited run here. Once they're gone, they're gone.
Getting good reviews.
Yeah, especially from Mike. He took a bottle home and is down a bottle. I know somebody who could use a good stiff drink after Friday. It's TSN insider Darren Dreger, one half of the Ray and Dregs hockey podcast, after a deadline that was outstanding. Dregs, that puppy delivered big names, well staggered activity right up to the wire.
I'm sure the producers had to
Friday.
find spots for James Duthie on the toilet and the hijinks. Yeah, you had to like wedge it in because you actually had content.
Yeah, and that's a big part of why all those devices are created, right? It's not just for the slow spots of the day, and there have been those historically speaking. It's to make sure that you build in enough time for James to use the facilities, for ODog to use the facilities and get a sandwich. So let's be honest here. But here's what's also interesting. And I mean this with great respect to all the competitors of TSN on trade deadline day. Our closest competitor, Sportsnet, they choose to go on the air at 10 a.m. Eastern rather than 8 a.m. Eastern, which is we always go up first at 8 a.m. So whether it mattered or not in the big grand scheme of things, I don't know. But I can tell you, we chewed on the possibilities of Mikko Rantanen and how that story was developing and unfolding from 8 a.m. sharp all the way through until we knew that the extension with the Dallas Stars had been agreed to, and away you go. So I'm wondering if the brass over there is going to go, you know what, next year? Yeah, we're starting at 8. We're going head to head.
Honestly, Dregs, I was here with Irf Gafar early on Friday. We were talking about it, and we were and I've noticed this in the past too. I understand that Duthie and a lot of people on your television are like, oh my God, this isn't great television. It's nothing when nothing is happening.
Yeah.
For me at this time of year, it is hockey talk. It is trade talk on network television. And I think the audience would watch like 3 full days of this, not to further busy your schedule. Because because the other thing was, we've had a few deadlines where not a lot moved, second round picks for the highest. There was a payoff on Friday. There was a massive payoff for the hockey
It's our
fan
election
who
days.
invested.
We've always said, in the for reporters, election day is the big thing. For sports, is trade deadline day, and it paid off.
So let me give you a window of what Thursday night was like. And I never complain about time invested because literally that's what we do for a living. I mean, TSN pays us for a couple, 3 times of the year. It's trade deadline. It's July 1st. And then, whatever bigger stories you're working on over the course of the year. But Thursday night, it wasn't all about Mikko Rantanen. It was also about another big piece in Brock Nelson. And just to tell a quick story there. So Winnipeg was deep after Brock Nelson. Perfect second line center. Toronto, probably realized at that point they weren't getting Braden Shen out of St. Louis. So we got to pivot. And it's either Scotty Lawton or it's Brock Nelson. So both Toronto and Winnipeg down the road with the Islanders until the Islanders say he's probably not coming to Canada. And now both Winnipeg and Toronto are like, pardon? It's like into the evening on Thursday. And in fairness to Brock, he would have gone to Toronto or Winnipeg. It was just that Colorado was choice number 1. That's where he wanted to be. That's where he wanted to go. So the Islanders find a way to make that deal happen. But there was miscommunication in how that message was delivered back to Toronto and back to Winnipeg, because they're like, well, why are we talking about first-round draft picks and prospects and all of that? So that was a drama unfolding Thursday night. And then all of a sudden, the whole Rantanen and Dallas thing, kicks into another gear. And needless to say, I walked into the studio with about 2 hours of sleep early on Friday morning. So that really got us going.
From one Brock to another then. One Brock got traded, the other did not.
Yeah.
To the best of your knowledge, why not for Brock Boeser?
I mean, it is curious, and I don't think that I don't think anyone can answer that. To be fair, I don't think Patrick Golfing had the answer for it when he met the media. I think he was incredibly blunt and honest in that the level of interest in Brock Boeser wasn't there. And that's the part that confuses me, because when I look around the league and I do see some of the rental acquisitions that were made, Brock Boeser is a quality part, I think, of secondary scoring. He is. Now, if you're making that trade and you think he's going to lead you offensively, that's a bit of a stretch. There's opportunity, there is capability, but if you're counting on it, that's too much. But there wasn't a market for Boeser, not a market that Vancouver could live with. And by a market, I'm saying there was no first-round pick offered. Sure, when the process started, I'm sure Vancouver was hoping that's what they were going to get. I think that there were maybe a team, maybe two, that nibbled on the idea of a second round pick, and then that disappeared, right? So now what do you do? Well, Vancouver's in this playoff mix, and I think they like their chances of Brock Boeser coming around productively in the final push here of the regular season, and then hopefully in the playoffs. And if that happens, then I think you rethink whether or not you want to take another run at him with a contract extension. Otherwise, he's the old own rental and he walks out for free. But it wasn't through a lack of effort that Boeser wasn't traded. Just wasn't there.
Yeah, surprising, because they haven't shown great interest in re-signing him to date, and they've even taken away his letter here recently. So, and of course, Brock has mentioned he's frustrated. Plus, there was Alvin's comments about how little value he had. So, certainly a situation worth monitoring. Did you hear anything on Elias Paterson, Dreger?
No.
Was there anything involved there?
Maybe there was some tire kicking leading up to the deadline. But again, guys, you're talking about an $11.6 million cap hit, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a real tough one. And we're probably going to get to the place where, you wonder, well, why did Vancouver leave so much salary cap space on the table, right? Well, and the reason I bring it up is because I should have mentioned it a minute ago talking about Brock. Vancouver was willing to eat 50%. They kept that one retention spot because they let teams know a couple of days before the deadline, we will retain upwards of 50% on Brock Boeser. And that was, again, just to juice the market a little bit, and it didn't materialize. So by the time you get through all of that, then you're sitting there going, okay, well, we're not really interested in being a third-party broker because, a draft pick to do that isn't really going to help us and all of those things. So it was a convoluted sort of few days leading up to, and then the deadline on Friday. I mean, the whole thing is curious as it's played out, but I'm not sure that the Canucks would do things a whole lot differently. I just don't think that there was anything that they could sink their teeth into. Be it Boeser, Paterson, the other unrestricted free agents, Suter, the pieces that they had, there just wasn't anything there that made sense that would be worthwhile, as opposed to using those pieces to help them again in this final stretch.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so with the cap space available, they weren't interested in adding. Were pieces too expensive to add?
Well, the one that caught me, and with all due respect to Beauvillier, to get a second round pick for him, and then the Vancouver Canucks couldn't attract flies, literally, for Brock Boeser, I just went, okay.
That's the killer for the fan base, I think, is that one, Dreger.
Yeah. But that's not on management. They were certainly willing to engage in conversations and did with Brock. But I think, again, we can appreciate why would you move the player if you're not even attracting that level of interest? And so I think, sure, they talked to some teams about the idea of a rental. But when you're getting a second round pick for Beauvillier, are you willing to pay more than that to acquire a rental piece with the uncertainty of what's ahead here for the Vancouver Canucks? And the other thing, again, just to back up a little bit, the information I was provided, for weeks leading up to the deadline was Vancouver's certainly focused on acquiring a center. I'm sure that the coaching staff would have loved for them to have gotten in and acquired a center. But to be honest, after the fact, what I've learned is, yeah, they put those feelers out there several weeks ago. That was to draw a crowd, to get the audience, to see maybe there's a player out there that hasn't been speculated on. And that's where I think we've read either Bruce Garriock or others who reported on, Vancouver circling around Josh Norris and the Ottawa Senators at the time. And that's 100% accurate. That's rock solid information. But then you see what Ottawa did in acquiring Dylan Cousins and the package they paid with Norris going to the Buffalo Sabres and trying to equate that to what Vancouver would have had to have paid Ottawa to acquire Josh Norris. So I think Vancouver feels confident and feels pretty good that any necessary changes, and maybe this comes back to Paterson being included in this conversation, any of those bigger changes, they're going to happen in the offseason. It's just with Petey, they need to happen before July 1st, but there's still ample time to do it.
The other problem, and I agree with you with everything you just said, I just can't even, within my wildest dreams, think about what centers are available sort of in their demographics. I don't think they want to get a 33-year-old center, and they don't want to get a 22-year-old center too, I don't think, because I think they want somebody that's going to help them in the Quinn Hughes window here. So, like wildest dreams, I can't figure out how they find their next center here, Darren.
Well, unless there is a team, and look, when you get to the offseason, now you've got 31 other teams that are vying here, right? And Paterson does not have trade protection until July 1st, right? Like the full. So, I mean, I still think that he's viewed as a valued asset. I do. And whatever's gone around Paterson in the last week plus, I think is this might be a stretch to call it game-changing, but I do think that it can alter his course because it does feel, you guys are there, it feels like when he met the media 3-4 days ago and took ownership of his play, his demeanor, his attitude, his combativeness with the media and all of that, that felt like an aha moment. It did. Now, we'll see whether or not that pays dividends, right? He has time now, between now the end of the regular season and the playoffs, to prove that he can perform. And if he does, then that opens the door to every possibility that's there, including keeping him. But if you feel like, you know what, there's just too much history, too much baggage, let's see if we can recoup something here. I think he's valued. I think if he can play the way he's capable of playing, he'll draw an audience in the offseason.
But of course, the big problem is they would need two. Then they get rid of him. They would then be like they need Elias Paterson to return and another top two center. You know, so
it's challenging.
I mean, it is. Where's Rick Tocchet in all this? Do you think? Because he's still without a contract.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's an option there, right? So it's a good question, and I'll be honest, I haven't really poked around on that just because of everything that's
you've been busy.
Going over. Well, not just me. I'm just saying around the Vancouver Canucks. I mean, dating back to pre-JT Miller trade and all the saga that we were forced to watch between Miller and Paterson and how that was impacting the team, and then of course you had the injury to Quinn Hughes, and you had the drama around the Four Nations and all of that. So it's a story that hasn't gone quiet, but I think that has been overshadowed by other stuff. So next time I'll have asked.
How's that? Sounds like a plan.
Dregs, Patrick Allvin went on, look, this management group has typically either wanted to get their guys re-signed or cash them in their UFAs by the deadline. That obviously didn't happen with Brock Boeser, and Allvin went on local radio after the deadline on Friday and basically resigned himself to, maybe we do have to lose this player for nothing in the offseason. Do you believe management was under a mandate, like make the playoffs at all costs? Like, did they have to make moves that at least
didn't jeopardize,
stay neutral here or increase the chances of the playoffs this year? They weren't allowed to make the futures deals.
No, I don't believe that, but wouldn't that be expected by every ownership group with every team that's on that cut line? I look at St. Louis and now granted, Braden Shen is under contract and some of their other pieces are under contract. So it's a completely different argument if that's the way we want to position it. But there wouldn't be many owners that, aren't actively involved and would say, look, we have some changes that we need to make. So make them. And if we're weaker and we miss the playoffs, I'm okay with that. I think you have to also measure the value. What if you're not getting back anything that actually moves the needle for Brock Boeser, but there's at least the opportunity that he can help you lock down that playoff spot? Wouldn't you, just using common sense, be okay with that? I mean, who knows? You qualify for the playoffs. Maybe all the pieces come together, the planets align, and they win a round. You just don't know. It's not inconceivable. So I never got the sense that there would be any type of mandate. But I mean, and in fact, I'm doing a lot of backing up here. But the messaging that I was given in researching the Vancouver Canucks approach to the deadline was that it was more in preparation for the off season than it was, just adding to lock down a playoff spot and see if they can do something. So in saying that and knowing that, maybe that flies in the face of, this idea of a mandate coming from ownership.
One more homework piece for the talk.
Yeah.
I with him injured, I get why there would not be any Thatcher Demko chatter. But what do you think is the future here for Thatcher Demko? As the Canucks head into a busy part of the schedule, would love to have had him, and he's not there for them. And of course, Lankinen with that extension now. So it's just an interesting off-season question here.
It 100% is, and it's a fair one. So here's what I think, based on some information is going to happen, and it makes perfect sense. It's from the playbook, right? So you get into the summer and you engage in contract extension discussions, and if you don't like the term and you don't like the dollar, then what do? You trade, right? And I think that's what's going to happen. But to say that I think that Vancouver is leaning this way or that way, that's premature. If I were betting, I would say that they would prefer to keep Thatcher Demko. Why wouldn't you? I mean,
but if you're Demko's representation, don't you want to play and get the bigger dollars? Not because you want to leave, but just because you know that there's more dollars out there if you have a good season.
Potentially, absolutely, no doubt about that. And I don't think that they're going to soften in any way in conversation or negotiation. It doesn't matter to the Demko camp what Kevin Lankinen has done. Right? No. If Vancouver wants to invest mega dollars in the position of goaltending, that's on them. It's just,
there's not going to be an injury discount here, though, from Demko. That we're saying.
I don't think so. Think so, and I don't think there would need to be. Again, from the position of the player here, some of this stuff where Thatcher is concerned is just unlucky too, right? And players will go through that, but without doing a full scale tour of the National Hockey League, and I could probably name 10 teams off the top of my head that would have interest in Thatcher Demko in some way, shape, or form. I mean, he's proven at this point of his young career that he's capable of potentially being an elite level goaltender when healthy. But you got to be willing to take that gamble. So it's going to work out for the Vancouver Canucks one way or another. It's just what is their appetite for investing several $1 million into the position of goalie. And that's a philosophical thing, because as we know, there are teams out there that are willing to do it because they feel like they have elite level goaltending. And then there are other teams who like the 1 and the 1A, and they like them at an affordable price. So Vancouver's not there yet, but they're going to get there real quick in the offseason.
Lastly, Dregs, for me, we'll bring it full circle here. But there was a bunch of sort of minor deals that trickled in. You can find a few deals out there on Friday that were depth forward, depth defenseman for third round pick or worse. But my rough count is 5 first round picks, 8 second round picks, and then some pretty good prospects.
Yeah.
All went on trade deadline day alone, not even considering trade deadline season. It was massively aggressive. What do you think? What do you think explains it? Why do you think GMs were so willing to give up futures this past Friday?
I think honestly, Matt, you just look at the standings. Look at how tight it is in the East, and look at how, there's still opportunity in the West. And I think that also gummed the market up a little bit. I'm not saying that it negatively impacted, what we experienced on Friday, but, it was thin on defense. It really was. And then all of a sudden, Luke Chen goes from Nashville to Pittsburgh, and Winnipeg is sour because they felt like they had something that was close on Luke Chen while in Nashville. And then Boston decides, okay, well, we're going a different direction. And Boston starts unloading, and Brandon Carlo ends up in Toronto. And now all of a sudden you're looking at some of these deals, and you're like, yeah, you know what? There's some hefty movement there. I think that in some way, shape, or form, and managers are always quick to say, we don't respond. Toronto would say, we didn't respond to what the Florida Panthers did or what the Tampa Bay Lightning did. And, Winnipeg would say, well, we didn't respond to what Colorado did or what Dallas did. Well, okay, really? I mean, you just generally speaking, I mean, you're not trying to play a game of chess here, but you are damn well making sure any question marks or any perceived holes are being addressed, because it's your last kick at it, especially for the top contending team. So I think that there was a level of response from some clubs. Whether they admit it or not is another thing.
Yeah. Again, my count, 13 second-round picks and 9 first-round picks during deadline season, plus some of the prospects. More of that, please, Mr. Dreger, each and every year, if you get any say in it,
Well, and I also like how, of course, Mikko Rantanen ends up in Dallas, but apparently, reportedly, there were 20 teams that were negotiating on Mikko Rantanen with the Carolina Hurricanes. So, come on.
That's great fun. Amazing stuff, Dregs. We're going to give you a few weeks off here. You've more than earned it, and we'll we'll catch up with you. Blake keeps giving you homework, though.
Yes.
Well, it's the wrong time to give him homework. He's going on spring break.
Good teachers
join us
give you lots of runway to get those projects done, right?
So you guys ask tough questions, too. You're right at it. It's right for the jugular every time. I like it.
If you are struggling with things like managing stress, anxiety, relationships, or divorce, reach out to the counselors at Advanced Counseling. Book your free initial consultation today at advancedcounseling.ca.
Harrison Price from the historic Wall Center.
When the hockey games are like Friday night, you don't really care where you sit at the arena. When they're like Sunday night, you should probably be in the Kanika Minolta President's Club. That makes it a little bit more palatable to sit through that. And you could do that thanks to your Pacific Toyota dealers. That's right. If you follow them on Instagram at Toyota Pacific, you could be entered in, or you will be entered in, to win an April 6th game in the President's Club section, and with 2 brand new Canucks jerseys on your backs as well. That's Canucks versus Vegas Golden Knights, by the way. The BZ4X is their brand new entry into the electric lineup of Toyota. It is a Toyota. It's just going to be perfect. And if you get behind the wheel of one, take one for a test drive, you'll see how much fun this vehicle is to drive as well. Lots of room for the golf clubs at the back, whatever else you need to throw back there as well. Go check it out right now. Take it for a test drive. 3.29% APR financing for 36 months and up to $6,500 in rebates and incentives. Go visit them at your local Pacific Toyota dealer today.
Contest at Toyota Pacific, Instagram, Facebook, residents of BC and the Yukon only, of course, and age of majority. Here's Jeff Paterson, our Canucks reporter, the host of Rinkwide Vancouver. It was a busy weekend for him. How are you, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm thinking that some of those Canucks top-end players should be well rested for this back-to-back set against Montreal and Calgary. Don't expend your energy on a Sunday. Save it for Tuesday and Wednesday nights.
So is that your big takeaway from the weekend, Jeff, the deployment of their better offensive players in the Dallas game? Or is there something
I
else?
think there's a couple. I mean, if we're recapping the weekend, I'm still sort of buzzing about the one-timer that I saw on Friday. I was there in person. I saw it. It's there. It's still in the arsenal. But yeah, for a follow-up, pretty disappointing for both Elias Paterson and for his hockey club. But Rick Tocchet, awfully animated, as I'm sure you guys have already discussed. Message sending, game 63. Time is ticking towards the end of the line here. And you can just feel the frustration of the head coach. I mean, it's a 1-1 game with 30 seconds to go in the second period. Just get it to the third and take your chances. It's still the Dallas Stars, and they're playing back-to-back. And they've got a lot of top-end talent, but that had to be frustrating. Just a bunch of little breakdowns that lead to a big goal for the Dallas Stars. Paterson loses a face-off. Lankinen throws the rebound right onto the stick of Granlund. Forbort and Myers basically both go to Rantanen in front of the net, leaving Granlund wide open. And so it's just disappointing that I didn't think effort was terrible. Again, they're in a 1-1 tie late into the second period against one of the top teams, the best team in the NHL since Christmas. But the minute Dallas gets up 2-1, we just know how steep the mountain is for this hockey club.
Well, and coach didn't hate the effort either against the Dallas Stars. And it leaves us to ask, Jeff, like, are there enough goals in this team to get to the Stanley Cup playoffs?
Yeah, it's starting to become a totally legitimate question. When you're leaning on Derek Forbort to provide your only boost, his first goal in 2+ years.
And a beauty, but and
it came at the result of a good shift. Like, there was a lot to like in that moment. Yeah. But guys, like, if you look at who scored the goals here recently, Carson Soucy with 1 foot out the door. Teddy Bluger, who hadn't scored since before Christmas, is all of a sudden the hottest guy on this team. He's got 2, but one of them's an empty netter. And then you get Derek Forbort, who just isn't looked to score goals. And so on and on it goes. It's just unbelievable how little they generate. And so I guess the idea is, from Rick Tocchet's standpoint, Paterson and DeBrusk and Boeser, they weren't going. They weren't. And there were some defensive miscues as well. All added up to Rick Tocchet saying, you got to earn your ice time. I suppose the hope in his mind is that, all right, they probably weren't going to beat the Dallas Stars, but if I can get to these guys and get them better, Montreal is a gettable game, and then obviously the game on Wednesday in Calgary could very well be their season. I mean, there's enough runway that if they lose that game to the Flames, they're not out of it, but that becomes a significant hockey game. And it's the back end of back-to-backs. And, by the way, the Flames have been idle since Saturday and don't play until that game on Wednesday. So schedule certainly working in Calgary's favor there. And, yeah, I mean, I'm starting to get a little concerned about Brock Boeser, quite frankly. All the noise around him and all the chatter, and we talked about him a lot leading into the deadline and the fact that he made it through the deadline. But 8 games now since the Four Nations without a goal and just hasn't looked dangerous and clearly missing JT Miller. But guess what? JT's not here. And so for Brock, like, this does become a matter of dollars and cents. He maybe didn't like the offer that the Canucks had put on the table, and we'll see how this all plays out. But, like, if he really struggles down the stretch here, and what's that going to do for his bargaining power, for his earning power as an unrestricted free agent? We always say, a guy with a 40-goal season on his resume, he's going to get paid, and he will. But I do wonder if he fizzles out down the stretch here, what does that do to potential suitors? Are there some teams that maybe step back? We know that the offers weren't particularly strong for him at the trade deadline. And I still think that was more about the asking price than the player itself. But, like, literally millions of dollars on the line for Brock Boeser here over these final 19 games.
Wouldn't that be amazing if they kind of backed into a better negotiating position in all this because he happens to stink down the stretch?
You might as well wait now. Like, if you're Alvin and Rutherford, there's no sense trying to get him on the dotted line now. See how the rest of this season goes before you commit anything.
Tocchet keeps talking about work rate for all these guys, Boeser included. Is he unwittingly throwing himself under the bus? Like, at what point is the work rate of the player? Like, you hope that it's innate. You hope that it's just in the gut of the player to give it 100% every time out there. But at this point, when it's so repetitive and he keeps on saying it, at what point is it on the coach to try to get it out of the player?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're at that point, and maybe have been for a little while here, chicken and egg, about is it the system or is it the players? I still maintain that these are better players than they are showing. And I think I'll die on that hill. And I get that there is angst in the marketplace. And we've said it's going to be tough. If they flame out and don't make the playoffs, it is going to be difficult to sell this group to this fan base next season. Oh, and at a 20% uptick in prices, by the way. Mm-hmm. And so there's going to be some really big, pivotal organizational decisions, I think, that have to be made, and the future of the head coach is a part of that. But there are 19 games remaining here, and they're in a mud puddle with Calgary doesn't score much and doesn't win at a rate any greater than the Vancouver Canucks. St. Louis kind of does its thing and scuffles along, and Utah as well. But, this is a big week, obviously. Calgary on Wednesday, Utah on Sunday. So by the time we do this next Monday, if the Canucks are able to put it all together and put a little distance between some of those teams, you'll be feeling better about their chances of making the playoffs. But, yeah, I mean, look, Rick Tocchet's a defense-first coach. We know that, right? That much is evidently clear. And Patrick Allvin said on Friday at his press conference, our plan is to try to win these games 2-1. That's great until your opponent gets 2, and all of a sudden your plan's out the window. And this idea of now all of a sudden scoring 2 yourself, or dare I say 3, to win a game in regulation, it just becomes a monumental ask. And, go down the line, guys. Like, all the heat's on Elias Paterson for understandable reasons given his price point. Brock Boeser has been the focus here of late. Jake DeBrusk has been pretty consistent and leads the team with 22 goals, but most of his productions come on the power play. I think he has 2 5-on-5 goals since Christmas. Most of the game is still played 5-on-5. Like, you want power play production, but ultimately the game is played 5-on-5. And even a player like Philip Hedl, you trade JT Miller, the talk was more opportunity, increased role here. Look out, he's going to spread his wings. Scored in his debut. He has 1 goal in 11 games since then. And yes, his speed is noticeable, but that has to translate. And so you come back to sort of what I talked about earlier. Like, right now, who do you look to thinking that's your guy that is going to produce the offense necessary to get this team over the hump? And, part of the problem here too, guys, is 0-5 now against Dallas, Vegas, and Winnipeg. And 5 of the remaining 19 games are against those 3 top teams. So, a quarter of the games left in the schedule are against those teams. And in 4 of the 5 games that they've played, they've been held to 1 goal. Like, they just cannot generate offense against good teams. They struggle to generate offense against subpar teams. And so this idea of, do they have enough in their holster to get to the playoffs? I need to see it, quite frankly, because as I sit here right now and having watched since the Four Nations and since they traded JT Miller, you have a tough time convincing me that there is enough offense there to get them where they want to go.
And that's honestly, and I said it in the first block, Jeff, why I think we heard what we heard from this coach last night with regards to Paterson, Boeser, and to a lesser degree, DeBrusk. I just don't think he draws a big distinction right now in terms of offensive capabilities between those 3 guys and guys like Drew O'Connor and Jonathan Lacramacki and some of the other guys who we may look at and say are, too young or more pluggers or this, that. I just think he draws a lot of distinction right now.
Pedigree doesn't matter.
In terms of who's going to help him offensively between the guys who are supposed to and paid like it and the guys who don't necessarily have that NHL profile.
And I think in this market, we all understand that Quinn Hughes is out of the lineup and has missed 13 games. And obviously, they're better when he's in there. But there's still this massive disconnect for me that Quinn Hughes was having this repeat Norris season on the fringes maybe of the Hart conversation, or maybe not even on the fringes, in the Hart conversation. And how does Quinn Hughes produce the way that he has under this coach and in this system? And it hasn't rubbed off on a single forward. So this idea that, they're going to get Quinn back at some point, look out, that's when they're going to start cooking with gas, I'm not so sure. Quinn makes them better. You'd think he'd make their power play better, although the power play's been all right in his absence. But I still, and I cover this team, I'm there every single day, and I can't figure out how Quinn Hughes can get to 60 points and not a single forward is at 40. Like, if I was a forward on this team, I'd just pass Quinn the puck and say, get me some points, man. Like, help my stats, help me pad my stats. But it's a massive disconnect that even moving forward, they've got to figure out, like, how do you get peak Quinn Hughes, but how do you get Quinn Hughes to drag these other guys along with him so that their offensive totals are a little more robust than they have been this season?
He's an assist per game, Quinn Hughes. And yet you're right. It's like, is he assisting on goals that aren't being credited to people? Like, where are those goals?
2 assists on most goals, right? Like,
it's like the goal scorer evaporates, does not get credit, although the assist stays on the ground. It's truly unbelievable. At this point, we're all guessing. I mean, Quinn Hughes is not playing these back-to-backs midweek. Do we just assume that based on the way he was practicing the last week?
Yeah, I watched him on Friday morning ahead of the trade deadline, ahead of the morning skate, and he was out there for about 20 minutes with Jason Krog, the skills coach, didn't shoot pucks at all. Basically, whatever puck handling he did was on his backhand, a couple of saucer passes, but was not shooting pucks. And, that was a huge red flag to me. Took Saturday off. They said that was a scheduled day off. Apparently skated with Thatcher Demko on Sunday. And now it's another team day off. And then you get into these back-to-backs. And this is part of the problem, too, with this compressed schedule coming out of the Four Nations break is not only a lot of games stacked, but very little practice time. And so you'd think, we've seen Quinn get injected back into the lineup. But for Thatcher Demko, time is ticking now with 19 games to go. By this time next week, they're now to 15 games and not much practice time. And Rick Tocchet has said, that's the next step in the progression is to get a few practices in. So I think your guess is as good as mine on Demko. I do think that Hughes is closer. I think we're going to see Quinn Hughes again, hopefully sooner rather than later. That game last night could have used Quinn Hughes and Miro Heiskanen all day, every day, just to up the entertainment factor. But yeah, how effective Quinn will be. And, there's enough messaging now coming out of the organization that he's not going to be fully healthy. Even if we see him again, we know that this is something that he's battling through. And so can he be the difference maker? Can he get to the apex of his powers? That seems like a stretch as well. But yeah, as we sit here on Monday, thinking that he's going to play either of these games, Tuesday or Wednesday, feels like a long shot to me.
We won't call this reporting, but have you heard any good working theories on what's injured if he's not taking shots? We don't think it's an appendage, like a wrist or hand or something, do we? We seem to think it's more
I
core.
think they've said it's a different injury, but related to the oblique. So
right,
I
so
think
core of some sort,
compensatory. You get back in the lineup. You're trying to protect one side. Maybe you stretch something else somewhere. It feels like in the core, and so and all of this against the backdrop of if they sneak into the playoffs, where he may as well wear a bullseye on his back because you know that teams are coming.
Tenderize him.
Yeah. Well, and the stat you had about their record against the teams they're most likely to face in the first round of the playoffs. But, Hughes not being 100% all year, it just further clouds what happened or didn't happen on Friday. Your $11.6 million center isn't going. Your Norris Trophy defenseman is playing through
limited capacity,
is out and is going to be playing through at least one, if not a couple of injuries when he gets back. Your Vezina finalist goaltender is on the shelf, and still, you've got a good number of your eggs. You've got a good number of eggs in this basket. I don't get it, Jeff. Did you see anything over the weekend by way of reporting that further informs your view and what you told us Friday about the Seinfeldian deadline about nothing?
Yeah, not really. I know Elliot Friedman talked about the Canucks and their demand for a first rounder on the headlines on Hockey Night. It sounds like if they were talking to a team like Carolina, that it sounded like it may be more of an expanded deal where Carolina was willing to part with a first, but they wanted Boeser and a piece back in return. And, they were trying to broaden it a little bit rather than just ponying up a first rounder for Brock Boeser, who obviously made it through the deadline. We heard what Patrick Alvin had to say. And so, this team marches forward now. Look, Dallas was always going to be in a snarly mood, lost to Edmonton on Saturday night, but they are the Dallas Stars. And even without Rope Hintz, still a ton of depth and top-end talent now with Rand. Guys, how easy did that Jason Robertson goal look in transition? Right? We've spent a good deal here talking about how difficult it is for the Canucks to generate offense. Dakota Joshua turns the puck over, and the Stars go back, and they just made it look so damn easy to score off the rush. And so, that has to add to the frustration of Rick Tocchet. He's sitting there behind the bench watching that as well and thinking, we've got guys with some puck skill out there, and yet we can't get beyond the blue line, and Stars turn it back and stretch the lead. Now 3-1. That game was essentially over. So.
Yes, it was. Boeser and the A. Do we know what's going on there?
No, I was hoping somebody was going to ask post-game. Rick obviously wasn't in a chatty mood, but I still hoped that question was going to come up because, of mixed minds. It's a letter on a jersey. Big picture, they didn't lose to the Dallas Stars because Brock Boeser didn't have an A, but it's curious at the very least that this is this long-serving, good, loyal employee You've kind of put the knife in and twisted it on a handful of occasions. He's just come through this weekend where it felt like you were trying to diminish his value, and then he shows up on Sunday night, and a guy that's played 12 games for the Vancouver Canucks all of a sudden is now part of the leadership group, and Brock Boeser kind of left flapping in the breeze. So, no, I mean, at some point, I'll put the question to Rick Tocchet. We'll see if it's a simple rotation or if there was some more message sending in that. But again, on the list of issues for the Vancouver Canucks, it's down there somewhere, but it's not nothing either, right? I think how you treat players and how this group moves forward, I think all of that matters. And so it was surprising to me, certainly.
Yeah.
Put me in the camp that raised eyebrows when I saw that the A had been removed.
Well, they've been above board. They've been above board in saying that the emotion of the trade deadline affected him. They said that on record. Yeah. And so then you take away the A. How do you expecting that not to have an effect on
it too? Like all that JT Miller went through earlier in the season, didn't ever lose his letter. Elias Paterson's season, they've never taken the letter off him, but it just feels like Brock is the easy target for this organization time and time again. And that's sort of my read on this one. And so, look, Marcus Paterson has been a nice addition. By all accounts, a really good guy in that locker room, but 12 games on his resume as a Vancouver Canuck, enough to get an A slapped on for a game against the Dallas Stars.
Yeah, and particularly if you're trying to get him re-signed on a player-friendly contract, that seemed like that just doesn't seem like the way to go. But in terms of trading players, Jeff, and had this discussion last week with a couple of people, Horvat said he didn't like the way things were handled. Brock seemingly has a gripe now. Elias doubting his injury. Yast and got Carson Soucy to waive a no trade. That after Kuzmenko and Mikheyev had to sign off too, not to mention the Tanner Pearson hand injury. Are you starting to get a little worried about this management group, which I think has fallen out of favor with the fans, but falling out of favor with agents, clients, and players here, the way they've gone about operating their business recently?
I don't know. We've asked that question a bunch of times. They still seem to be able to attract free agents. It's a lovely city, if not a little expensive, but these guys can afford it. But yeah, I mean, look, I did a Canucks Army Monday mailbag today, and one of the questions was 3+ years on the job now for this management group. Is this organization any further ahead than when they showed up? And I said, quite frankly, they've retooled the defense and they have made some strides there. They have got the cap under control. They've done some nice work with Abbotsford, and even this weekend, getting Artur Silovs down for a start on Saturday so that he's ready to go. I think he'll get the call against Montreal on Tuesday night. That's good use of the farm system. So there have been some things here, but in terms of, are they any closer to a Stanley Cup now than when they started? It's hard to see that that's the case. So my answer in the column was no. They've just shifted some of the issues around. They've addressed the defense, and now it's come at the expense of anybody that can put the puck in the net up front.
All right, my friend, you've got a busy week. We'll be listening, watching Tuesday, Thursday, Montreal, or Tuesday, Wednesday, Calgary, Montreal, then Calgary, Tuesday, Wednesday. Yes. And then, of course, this weekend, we'll catch up on Friday, Jeff.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks.
Secure some price from the historic Wall Center. And if you're heading to a game in downtown Vancouver, make a staycation out of it. Book your stay here at the Wall. Call 604-331-1000. Ask for the Secure some price rate. Some blackout dates apply based on availability. This segment brought to you by Ben Moss, a proudly Canadian-owned and operated company with more than 100 years of history in this great province. 5 locations across British Columbia, Victoria, Chilliwack, Abbotsford, Willowbrook, and Langley, committed to customer satisfaction. Check out the large selection of Canadian mine diamonds, lab-grown diamonds. They got mine diamonds with payment plans to suit your needs. For more information, check out benmoss.com. Ben Moss, for the love of jewelry. Well, how about those Whitecaps? You called the game with Dolly on Saturday, Blake. The 2-0 victory over CF Montreal and the first 3-0 start in their MLS history. They lead the West. Only Philadelphia out east is perfect through 3 games, 8 goals for, 2 against on this young season. That's second best to Philadelphia. And how about the way they did it Saturday? Going in, you were missing Jaden Nelson, who had been such a maestro. You were missing Ocampo on suspension. You were missing Atakube on injury. Sabi as well, the newcomer who we haven't seen yet. And then Ryan Gault, the team MVP, he leaves 22 minutes into this with the score 0-0, and he'll be, maybe you have some info, but reevaluated earlier this week. Matias Laborda scores, and the rookie. We talked about Tate Johnson being put into the spot because of Ocampo and Atakube injuries. His first MLS goal, quite a night at BC Place on Saturday.
It was a lot of fun to see. It wasn't fun to see Gold leave, but it was fun to see him. I won't say not be missed. Of course, you miss him. Maybe they win 3 or 4-0 if he's there. But the depth is there on this team right now, and that's with all those injuries that you spoke about, which is what you want in a squad. Like, you want to be able to have 3 guys out and be okay, and that's what happened. And they got to 4 or 5 guys out, and they still dominated Montreal. There were maybe 25 minutes total in which Montreal sort of had the front foot, but that's even generous, perhaps. Whitecaps are certainly the better team on the day, and they keep their home pitch going forward. Remember, they weren't that great at home last year. All these points count. We've often said to be an MLS Cup champ, you need to finish strong in MLS, and that remains true. But they don't take these points away from you. For the Whitecaps, the main thing for them is they want to get as high in the playoff bracket as they can this year. And these 9 points, like, my goodness, 9 points comes in handy at any time of the year.
Well, especially since they've made a bad habit of fading down the stretch in previous seasons. But a great day, as you say, at BC Place. They're off to Monterey Wednesday for the CONCACAF Champions Cup round of 16. That is the second leg of this aggregate, tied at 1 goal apiece. And then Dallas on Saturday before coming home here to BC Place.
My non-team info is that they think that the goal injury is not as serious as it looked. Mm-hmm. The team is going to give an update at some point today, so keep your ear to the ground on socials for that update.
Well, Blake, we signed off an extended trade deadline show on Friday, and then did anything happen down the I-5 with the Seahawks?
No, they're just running back the same guys. I think it's just same old.
A massive 4-day news period for the Seattle Seahawks, who trade quarterback Geno Smith to the Vegas Raiders for a 3rd-round pick, reuniting Geno with head coach Pete Carroll, or Buddy B. Leasy, on Twitter. Said, so I guess that, plane summit you guys talked about, where Pete Carroll walked up to first class and spent an hour talking with Seahawks GM John Schneider, new head coach Mike McDonald, did materialize in something.
That was something.
Then they trade DK Metcalf to Pittsburgh for a 2nd-round pick and a pick swap. There had been reports on the weekend that they were looking at Aaron Rodgers, and yet they come away with, for many, the best quarterback on the free agent market in Sam Darnold, a 3-year, $100 million deal.
Yeah.
Making him the 18th highest paid quarterback, $55 million in guaranteed money, which is also 18th.
So the question is, did they get better at quarterback?
Now, I know Schneider likes the bigger armed quarterback, and Darnold certainly has that over Geno Smith, but I'm not so sure how much further along you are. If you get the Sam Darnold from the first 16 games of this past season, sure, but then he had the really difficult game against Detroit and the really difficult playoff game. It looked like a lot of people around the league felt like the 2 defensive coordinators there had unlocked the Sam Darnold mystery. Okay, here's what we're going to do to neutralize him. And what I will say is, I don't think this should preclude the Seahawks from going quarterback early in the draft. I think you have to give yourself as many outs
It's only a 3-year deal.
Possible. Yeah, exactly. It's only a 3-year deal. He's a reclamation project. Done good, but let's remember the totality of Sam Darnold's career until this past season was not great shakes for a guy who was selected so high in the draft. What I do think is happening here, and of course the Seahawks traded Geno after they offered him a 2-year deal that would have handsomely paid him $40 million plus per year, and he said no. I do think you're seeing John Schneider move on Pete Carroll guys, right? Lockett, Metcalf, Darnold, or Smith, although Lockett was just too big a cap savings. And creating the team that Mike McDonald wants in his image, the head coach who's 1 year onto the job. They did re-sign linebacker Ernest Jones, defensive tackle Jaron Reed, so that should bode well for their rush defense. And you were musing about Devontae Adams, who was released. Would he be a nice replacement for either of the wide receivers? Well, he signed with the L.A. Rams.
But they're going to need to sign somebody.
Oh, for sure.
On the receiving core.
Receiver is now a significant need for the Seahawks, along with offensive line. And, like I said, I think you're still in the game of quarterback planning for the long term. Football news north of the border, J.C. Abbott of 3 Down Nation reporting the BC Lions and Winnipeg Blue Bombers are going to be awarded second-round picks in this upcoming draft for playing the most Canadian snaps in 2024. This is a nice program the CFL instituted a few years back to encourage the playing of domestic Canadian national players. So here's the upshot. The Lions do have the 3rd pick in the draft, but everyone expects they're going to have to forfeit that for salary cap violations. We know they went way up and above when they signed Nathan Rourke. But the Vernon Adams trade is going to net them the 9th overall. That would be 10, but because they're forfeiting, it moves up 1. They got that from Calgary. They'll have the 12th overall, their own second-round pick, and they will have this bonus pick, the 19th. Overall to refortify their Canadian content. They lost some guys this year too, like Lacumbo, Mackey, Green in free agency, turned over some offensive linemen. Surrey Mitsubishi poll question results for Friday. We asked you, how do you grade the Canucks trade deadline week, pass or fail? The people said
fail.
Percentage on fail?
88.
90. So we'll read a couple of the fail comments and then get to the few comments that I found there, and I did go through all 50, whatever of them that were passed. Craft beer guy, wait for it. This team doesn't make the playoffs. Boeser walks, and we didn't cash in on the biggest trade deadline sellers market ever. Seems about right. Okay, that is the doomsday scenario, right? Miss the playoffs, Boeser, Suter, walk. You're on the market replacing these guys it's going to be an expensive marketplace.
And it's possible.
Yeah. Hassan from Burnaby, absolute fail. Good to hear from Hassan. It's a huge seller's market not to capitalize this gross asset mismanagement. The honeymoon is over with this management group. Yes. We mentioned that Friday. Darren, if you're not on position to be a buyer, be a seller. Team has historically not been good at asset management. This doesn't bode well for improving in that area. Yes, I think this was a big moment of, as we talked about earlier in the show, either lack of alignment, lack of will, but some concerns now about this front office, and again, more concerns about ownership meddling. Here are the past comments. Gregory, ultimately, the players dictate their own value. People would have been outraged with the cost or the return on Boeser if he was moved for what was offered. Okay, we had that discussion on Friday. Are you willing to take less on Boeser at the end? Would that have been a bigger sin than keeping Boeser? Andrew, they needed a forward, but if you trade Boeser, then you need 2 forwards. To make this team better, you need to trade your future away. The grass is always greener. I like the no-move play. Okay? And Jared says, massive W. No overpaying has been done. Not exactly the most aspirational bar, Jared, but okay. If your scale was just don't overpay in a seller's market, that was achieved. Errors and omissions from Friday's program and beyond. Had mentioned the UBC, the Indochino men's and women's Final 8 going on at UBC this weekend, the U Sport Basketball Championships. I'd said last week, March 14th to 16th, 13th to 16th. The games get going on Thursday. So head on out to the Point Grey campus for that. We didn't have the final details of the Brandon Carlo deal towards the end of Friday's show. So it's Carlo from Boston to the Leafs with 15% retained. Fraser Minton, a conditional first, it's top 5 protected, and a 4th-round pick going to the Leafs. We had it as less than that with not all details in, since that one was made at the death. Anything to self-report, anything Yerke or anybody in the inbox wants to correct?
Nothing that I see right now. No, I think people also will grant us, I think, amidst the chaos of a trade deadline, the odd
Yeah. I just wanted to fix that one
Yeah.
because that one was principally different from what was initially reported on that one. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Appreciate you spending some time and connecting with us. Please do subscribe to all our assorted channels, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Follow on social. That's X, Insta, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and Blue Sky Live on many of those platforms, noon Pacific time weekdays. And, of course, support the community sponsors you hear us talking about. And keep it local.